Hello and welcome back. Massive move last night. We're all still in a little bit of shock, but yes, it is true. Tony DeAngelo signs with the New York Islanders and he could get some power play one time. We'll break all of that down later on in the video. But in all seriousness, this Rantanen-Necas trade is a massive one, but there honestly isn't that much fantasy impact here. Both of those players are completely owned up. I'm sure somebody in your league took a flyer on Taylor Hall last night. You could do that if you want, but maybe the best idea here is to target Sebastian Aho in a trade, but I don't know who's going to give him up at this point with him attached to Mikko Rantanen. So to top it all off with these two players, they're not playing 4-game weeks next week, so let's see who is by breaking down the Week 17 schedule. 50 games this week. Of note, Sunday is not really a light night. 9 games on Sunday, only 9 on Saturday, so Saturday's not that heavy. It usually is. So we've got 5 on Monday, Tuesday's got 8, Wednesday's got 5, Thursday with 10, Friday with 4, and then Saturday and Sunday with 9. So no crazy nights where you've got 14 games going on. So there should be an opportunity to find some value on the waiver wire. You've got Toronto, San Jose, and Ottawa all with 2-game weeks. Ottawa has 0 light nights. They might have the worst schedule of the bunch, but if you have any of those big guys in Toronto, any of those big guys in Ottawa, maybe Celebrini or anybody in San Jose that you've been holding on to, maybe you have to look at the waiver wire this week to find some value. Now, with all that said, these are the teams with the best schedules. You've got Vancouver with the perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, and they have a road trip in there. So 3 of the 4 on the road. That's not going to be great, and they're not necessarily playing all that well right now. This will be a big week for Vancouver. The JT Miller trade could drop at any moment. There's a lot going on. This could be an interesting week for fantasy in terms of guys leaving or coming into the fold with that trade. So something to keep in mind while you're looking at your player ads this week. You've got a front-loaded 3 and 4 for Philadelphia and LA. You've got a back-loaded 3 and 4 for Detroit, Calgary, and the Islanders, and then you've got that front-loaded 3 and 4 for Seattle as well, with a little bit of an easier schedule after they get out of the Oilers. So you've got the Ducks and the Sharks there, not crazy heavy nights, but a little bit heavier, and then you've got that game on Sunday against Calgary. So there's a lot to choose from. We're going to go over each of these teams because there are a bunch of players available off of each of them, but we'll start it off with the perfect schedule, Vancouver Canucks. So this is what it looks like in terms of their animated chart. You can see Sherwood up there leading the league in hits and scoring goals with all of that. So he's been very productive, very complete in terms of his hitting. Quinn Hughes leads the way in terms of defensemen in the NHL. JT Miller's up there. He could get traded, as I just mentioned. And then you've got this little pocket of players here. You got Besser, DeBrusk, Garland, Pettersson, and Hronek. Now, Pettersson and Besser owned up. DeBrusk and Garland are not. We'll cover them in a second. Same with Hronek. But before we get to that, I just wanted to mention, look at Quinn Hughes up here. He's at the top. There's Sherwood up here, but that's because he leads the league in hits. He routinely puts up 10 hit games. But if you look at the next slide over here, Quinn Hughes leads NHL defensemen in terms of points per game, 1.21 points per game, 52 points in only 43 games. And he's only 1 point back of the 2 leaders in the defensive scoring race. So he has been absolutely dynamic. 20 power play points, 3 shots per game average, and you're going to want exposure to him, and you can get it this week through Filip Hronek. He's his defensive partner. He's back, healthy, ready to go. 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points, 9 shots, and 5 blocks in his last 4 games since coming back. 23 minutes of time on ice, and he is playing with Quinn Hughes. So this is going to get you some of those garbage points. Anytime Quinn Hughes makes a breakout pass to Hronek or vice versa, and then they go up and score, that's going to benefit you if you pick up Hronek. You get some decent hits coverage, 1.58 hits, 1.08 blocks. Shot volume is a little bit low on the season, but this is a small sample size. I wouldn't read too much into what this looks like just based off of earlier this season and now. So in the past, he's been really good in terms of assist coverage. He does get some power play time occasionally, and he's going to get you a bunch of points, especially those garbage points playing with the top players on Vancouver. Now, you also have Jake DeBrusk, who hasn't done anything in 8 games. He's on power play 1, though. And one thing that I wanted to bring up, which I'll get to in just a second, is his shot volume. So you can see here 2 shots per game. That's okay. Goal scoring is pretty good, 92nd percentile. And the power play numbers are pretty good. He also does hit, so almost a hit and a half per game. So that's nice to see if you're in a category league and you're looking to stuff some categories. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this shot volume, look at what happens. He's got 8 games with no points whatsoever. He had 5 of those games with 1 shot on goal. Now he started to shoot a little bit more, 2 shots in each of the next couple of games. But look at what happens when he shoots the puck. This little cluster of production, you've got 2 shots, 4 shots, 3 shots. This cluster down here, 4 shots, 2 shots. When he shoots the puck, he will obviously score. He just has to get it in his head and shoot. And the good news is, as we saw with that last one on his player log, he is starting to shoot a little bit more. So hopefully he gets some shot volume this week, and that will result in some goals. But other than that, not much to speak of for DeBrusk. The next guy you could look at is Connor Garland. He was off to a really good start. You can see him here in November, rocketing up over to a 55, and then he's kind of plateaued there and stayed there, and kind of gone backwards a little bit over the last little bit. 1 assist in his last 4 games, nothing to speak of there in terms of fantasy value, but you can get exposure to their top 6 through Connor Garland, and he does get a little bit of power play time as well, and who knows what happens with this Miller trade. Maybe he gets bumped up in the lineup as a result of that. So 32% ownership for him, 41 for DeBrusk, 42 for Hronek. These are probably 12-team plays. We do have a bunch of other deep league play options as we move along in the video. So with that, we'll cut it here for Vancouver, and we'll move on to the Philadelphia Flyers. Now the Flyers, they're a team that they don't get a lot of scoring. They're not necessarily the best scoring bunch, but they do shot block a lot. And they do have a couple of guys who are available in deep leagues that can potentially be owned up. So you've got Travis Konechny out in front here. Tippett right here, he's probably your next best option, but he's in the mid-70s in terms of ownership percentage. And then you've got this cluster here. You've got Hathaway for hits, 3.6 hits per game, 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 points in his last 8. So he's your hitting option this week. But then you've got Michkov, you've got Frost, you've got Anthony Richard, who we aren't going to touch on, but he did have a really nice start to the season earlier when he got called up. Hasn't been as productive lately. Joel Farabee's going pretty well. So as we turn to the player hubs, we've got Morgan Frost at 9%. He's got 7 points in his last 9 games, 1 assist in his last 4 though. So he was red hot going into last week. I mentioned him last week on the video, and he kind of cooled off this week. He's got still 7 points in 9 games, 2 power play points. He's still line 1 and power play 1. So that's one of the main reasons to grab him. Nothing crazy in his file in terms of, power play numbers are okay, goal scoring's okay, shot volume is a little low, assists are okay, not a lot of peripherals, 0.54 points per game. But at 9% ownership to get a guy on line 1 and power play 1, that's the main reason to go and grab Morgan Frost. Now you also have the option of Noah Cates, 5% ownership, single position left winger, 5 points in his last 7. Again, same type of thing with Frost cooling off. No points in his last 3 games. Line 3, power play 2, so a little bit worse in terms of his deployment. But what you do notice here is his trend basically back since mid-November, going from a 22-ish all the way up to a 44. Still not that crazy high in terms of his fantasy relevance. The hits are nice, though. 1.13 hits per game. At least you're going to get that, and you'll get some goal scoring, 76th percentile there. But if you're not looking for either of these 2 guys, you could go after Michkov. If you're in a shallower league, maybe a 10-teamer, I don't even know if he'd be available in a 12-team league. 5 points in his last 8 games. Line 2, power play 1. You can see his power play numbers are way better. 92nd percentile on the power play. 2.15 shots is a little bit low, but not bad. 85th percentile pretty much across the board in everything else. Offensively, 0.71 points per game is not bad for a rookie. And then last but not least, we've got Rasmus Ristolainen. He's going to be your hits and blocks guy from Philly this week. He's got a goal, an assist, 2 points, and a power play point in the last 8 games, which is weird. Doesn't get a lot of power play time, but they don't have a bona fide number 1 guy that they use. They've used Drysdale, they've used York, Zamula, apparently Ristolainen. 13 shots, 14 hits, and 16 blocks in that span. You can see 88th percentile in terms of blocks, 74th in hits, 1.62 hits per game, 1.54 blocks per game. So this is your hits and blocks D this week. You could also go Cam York for similar stats. He's got 17 shots, 10 hits, and 15 blocks in his last 8 games. And there's also Nick Seeler, 13 hits, 20 blocks in his last 8 games. This is a John Tortorella team. Everybody is required to block shots. So you can go ahead and pick up any defenseman not named Jamie Drysdale and pretty much expect to get some shot blocking out of it and a little bit of production. Now, Drysdale, if you look at his last couple of games, he does have a goal and 3 or 4 assists. However, he goes hot and cold, and he's been ice cold since that, so I'm not necessarily recommending Drysdale. With all that said, let's take a quick detour and look at some of the hottest players in the league over the last 5 games. Now, these are guys that you can potentially own. This list is very different when you don't filter that down. You've got guys like Philip Forsberg, who's been red hot with almost 2 points per game average over his last 13 points in 6 games. You've got Pastrnak, who's red hot, just had a 3-point game today as I recorded this. But then you've got the guys that you can potentially own. And there are a couple of guys on 4-game weeks we'll get to later. Bo Horvat, we're not going to cover, but he's red hot. 6 points in his last 5, 18 shots and 12 hits in that span with a couple of power play points. And then you also have Brock Nelson on this list, 5 points in his last 5 with 15 shots. And then there is a couple of other Islanders that we'll talk about later in the video. In terms of guys who are red hot, who are on 2-game weeks, you've got Granlund and OEL. I wouldn't necessarily pick them up, but I would maybe stash this information in the back of your head. Maybe Granlund's ownership drops a little bit and you can grab him at the end of this week. A couple of other guys, we talked about Fantilli a week or two ago. Actually, the last 2 weeks we've talked about him, and he's still going. 6 points in his last 5, 13 shots. Really nice deployment for him. Line 1, power play 1, so you're going to like that. I just went out and picked up Darren Radish today in the Creators League, 6 points in his last 5. He's getting some power play time with Hedman. They've kind of swapped, and one of them is quarterbacking one power play, one of them's quarterbacking the other, but Kucherov is pretty much staying out there for the full 2 minutes, so you're going to get exposure to him. 24% ownership is nice for Radish, and he's red hot right now. Maybe not a longer-term play, but for right now, a game or two here or there, Radish could be a good option. Kent Johnson, another Columbus option for you, 6 points in his last 5 with 12 shots and 3 power play points. We've been talking about Nick Schmaltz and basically that entire top line for Utah. You've got Logan Cooley a little bit further down. Cooley with 5 points in his last 5. He's been red hot for almost 3 months now, 2.5 months. He's been red hot. And Nick Schmaltz has also been hot. 6 points in his last 5, 12 shots, 3 power play points as well for him. So if you can get anybody on that top line, you really can't get Keller. So it's these two guys, Schmaltz at 33% and then Cooley at 58%. There are a couple of other guys that we'll talk about here, so I'm going to keep it moving. But just screenshot this if you want. There's a couple of guys on really good streaks. Schmaltz is one of them on an 8-game streak. You have Patrick Laine on a 4-game streak. Seth Jones on a 4-game point streak, but he's day-to-day. And then Tommy Novak coming out of nowhere basically at 1% ownership, your deep league play. He's got 6 points. JVR coming back with 4 goals in 5 games. Who expected that? So there's a bunch of different options at a bunch of different levels, and you can find these guys on your waiver wire depending on your league size. Let's keep it moving and let's get to the LA Kings. The Kings are a team that usually plays really good defensively. That's going to insulate their goaltenders, and Darcy Kemper has been playing really well over the last couple of months. Basically, since he came back from injury, you can see Kempe breaking out there. You can see Fiala trending up over the past couple of weeks. You've got Laferriere above Anze Kopitar. That's worth noting. You've got Brant Clark, and we'll get to him, and not necessarily him specifically. You have Jordan Spence, who will also cover, but the power play is going to change in LA with Drew Doughty potentially coming back. And then you've got Tanner Jeannot, your hits option. So as we turn to the player hubs, we'll start it off by looking at Jordan Spence, who is the power play player du jour, I guess. He's not power play 1, he's power play 2, but he has been getting it done. 3 points in his last 3 games, a power play point, 3 hits, 5 blocks. He's been kind of a little bit off lately. He's usually a very talented player who, when he does get that power play time, he can make him pay. He does get some shot blocks, not a lot of shot volume, and not a lot of offensive production in general. But I did want to mention this because he is playing pretty well right now, and at 1%, he's one of the defensemen that you can get in pretty much any league size. Up next, we've got your hits option, Tanner Jeannot, 3.21 hits per game. That's a little bit lower than a guy like Hathaway, but he has been known as a little bit more of a goal scorer. He hasn't broken out for that yet, but he is getting a decent line assignment. He could potentially be a decent option for you in the front half of the week. You get a bunch of hits Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then maybe you drop him for this Carolina game. There's not going to be a lot of scoring in that one. And then you pick up somebody else for the back section of the week. So that's how I would play it. 1 assist, 4 shots, 14 hits in his last 3 games, 7% ownership, and dual position eligibility is going to be nice for those heavier nights. And then last but not least, we've got Drew Doughty, who is traveling with the team right now. He practiced in a he practiced in a regular jersey last week. So He's pretty much ready to go. This is what he looks like in the preseason hub. Blocks are pretty good there, 89th percentile, 86th percentile in terms of power play numbers, and then the assists. This file looks very similar to Adam Fox, just with a lower point per game number. Blocks, power play, and assists are what he's known for, with a little bit of point per game coverage. So if you want to go out there and grab him, he will probably factor in on one of the power play units. Maybe they give Brant Clark a little bit more runway on the first unit. Maybe they give it right back to Doughty. Who knows? But if you want to get out in front of that on a 4-game week, Drew Doughty at 59% ownership. People have been stashing him all year for this reason. Now, before we move on to the Detroit Red Wings, I did want to mention Turcotte, who's at 1% ownership. He's getting top line with Kopitar and Kempe, but his ice time does fluctuate, and he doesn't get any power play time. Last game, I think he only had 13 minutes, so he may not be your best option, but in a deep league, you could go out and grab Turcotte for that line assignment. But now let's keep it moving and look at the Detroit Red Wings. And as we look at this, Mo Seider popping off in the first part of the season, and then everybody kind of regressing and returning back to this range. And you can see Larkin, DeBrincat, Raymond, basically that top line, that top power play unit. Kane started to heat up as we moved over here. And now where it stands today, you've got Larkin, who should be at the top here. You've got Seider, who's their most complete option further to the right. You've got Raymond playing really well, DeBrincat playing well. Kane is day-to-day. I believe that actually he might be out at this point. And then you've got the rest of the gang over here in this cluster. So as we move it to the player hub, the number one ad this week might be Vlad Tarasenko. I don't know if he's going to actually be on PP1, but with Kane out, that would be a decent option for the coaching staff to throw him on there because he's been relatively hot lately. 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points, 3 power play points in his last 7 games. You can see the power play numbers climbing to 80th percentile. You can see him going from a 38 up to a 43, so he's not the best fantasy option at 0.43 points per game. He's got the name value, but he doesn't really bring it in terms of the fantasy production. But with this line assignment and with the injury to Kane, that should elevate him in the lineup and be a pretty decent value for you. And he is relatively hot. You can see him down here, 3rd hottest player on the Detroit Red Wings. So that's worth noting as well. 8% ownership is extremely low for Tarasenko, but it's worth it because he hasn't been that productive this season with Detroit. Another option, and we talked about him in the past, Marco Kasper, 2% ownership, 7 points in his last 8 games, a power play point in there, 4 goals, and he does hit a little bit, 1.74 hits per game for a younger player, rookie, who was featured lower in the lineup in the past, maybe getting a little bit more of an opportunity with the new coaching staff, and that could potentially be resulting in a little bit more production. But this is a guy that's going to be your deep league target. You can see him down here. He's the 5th highest player behind Ben Sherratt, and that's a good sign for you. You can go from a 37 to a 44, kind of similar to Tarasenko, but his ownership is lower. The single position center eligibility is not the best, though. This is another situation where these Detroit players could be good for the back half of the week, especially that weekend back-to-back, though it is a 3-game road swing. 3 and 4 is tough, so that could be difficult to find some production. Up next, we're going to take a look at Seattle, and there are usually a ton of options out of Seattle. You can see Montour taking off to start the year. Vince Dunn was hurt, and that's why he's kind of all over the place, not having any production, but he is back now. So Montour and Dunn are both relatively owned up, and you can see nobody breaking away from the pack right now. Tolvanen, a little bit of a hitter, but not that great in terms of offense. Bjorkstrand's not that hot, and then there's this cluster right here of ownable guys, but there are a couple of options for you, especially on that top line. You got Jaden Schwartz, 15% ownership. We've talked about him in the past. Center, left wing, dual eligible, 7 points in his last 7 games, 21 shots in that span, 2.31 shots per game on the year, 89th percentile in terms of goals on the year, 0.67 points per game is nice. The power play numbers are a touch low, but he does have a power play point in his last 7, and you're getting that top line assignment with Kakko and Beniers. So that top line has been put together since Kakko came over, and they've been relatively productive, and we'll see that with this next slide, and that's Kaapo Kakko, 8 points in his last 7 games. I don't know if he ever had a stretch like that with the Rangers. He's finally found some players to play with that he seems to have some chemistry with. 3 goals, 5 assists, and a power play point in his last 7, 16% ownership. The single position eligibility is not great, but anything else is going to be good. He's been really hot since coming over to Seattle. 85th percentile in terms of assists. He's been setting up guys like Schwartz and Beniers for those goals, and he does get a little bit of power play time, although they do spread the scoring out, so that is worth mentioning. Also, you could look at Chandler Stevenson. It listed him as day-to-day. That's why I didn't necessarily mention him here. But he's been relatively hot with 6 points in his last 7, and he's relatively available, I think, at 8% ownership. So any of these guys could be decent options. Tolvanen could be a good option, but we're going to touch on Adam Larsson for your blocks coverage. 97th percentile in terms of blocks. He's got 4 points in his last 7 on top of that. So 14 blocks in his last 7. That's 2 shot blocks per game. He's above that on the year, 2.1 shot blocks per game and 1.24 hits. No power play time at all. Shot volume is low and offensive production is low, but he has been producing offensively lately. So you ride that hot streak while you can. And this is a front-loaded play. Maybe you don't want to hold on to him. Maybe you do. That Sunday game could come in handy. But at least for the front half, they've got 2 relatively easy opponents, and they're at home for both of them. So that could be a decent option, especially if you're looking to get out in front of that blocks category in the front half of the week and try to pad that stat early and hope that you can hold on to it for the rest of the week. We do have a couple more teams, so we'll keep it moving. Up next is Calgary. We're not going to look at the animated graph, spending a lot of time here, so I just want to keep it moving here. Blake Coleman, 34% ownership, 3 position eligibility. That is really excellent to see. They do have the Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, so those heavier nights, that's going to come in handy where he is that 3 position eligibility. 6 points, 17 shots, and 14 hits in his last 6 games. You can see here 2 hits per game on average, 2.35 shots per game on average. So he's going to get you those peripherals. If you're in a points league that gets any weighting for those, and or if you're in a categories league and you need to stuff those categories, he's going to be at least a nice peripheral floor for you. Line 2 and power play 2 is not necessarily ideal. You can get some power play 1 guys off this team. And if you want one of those power play 1 guys, you can look at Jonathan Huberdeau, 38% ownership, center left wing, dual eligible, 5 points in his last 6, 10 blocks. I didn't think of him as a shot blocker, but he has been doing that. Line 1, power play 1, 95th percentile in terms of goals. And the reason I mentioned that, his shooting percentage, 23.2%, is very high. This could potentially come down. He's never really been a goal scorer. More known as an assist guy, a setup guy, a power play specialist. He is getting those power play points for you, 87th percentile on the power play, but the shot volume is relatively low, 1.78 shots per game. So that's why this shooting percentage is so high. Something to note as you take a look at him on your waiver wire. He could cool off goal scoring wise, but he has been trending up for a long time now. It hasn't really slowed down. He plateaued a little bit here right around New Year's, and then kind of went right back up and continued moving up to 55 in the combined rating. So 0.76 points per game, that's the best we've seen out of him since that one season in Florida where he put up that crazy season. But this is the best he's looked in a Calgary Flames jersey this year. So if you're looking to ride this, you could potentially hold this for a couple of weeks. They do have a pretty decent schedule set up over a multi-week period. And then last probably and least is Jacob Pelche. 1% ownership. This is your deep league target. Center left wing, dual eligible. 6 points in his last 6 games and 9 hits. He's not a hitter. You can see here 44th percentile, less than a hit per game, but 9 hits in his last 6. He's over 1 hit per game in that span. So he's been a little bit more engaged. He is 4th line, so that is one of the main detriments to his file. But hey, if he's going to be this productive, they have a couple of opportunities to score some goals against Anaheim and potentially Detroit. Maybe even Seattle if they see Grubauer in that game. Grubauer lets in a ton of goals, so we'll have to see who they use for that game. But this could be your deep league play, 1% ownership. Line 4 is not the best, but he does have relatively hot production heading into Week 17. Last team we'll touch on is the New York Islanders. We did mention Bo Horvat. He's 68% owned. So we're going to look at Brock Nelson. 53% is a little bit better for you. And you can see here on the trend, you had Brocktober coming to an end, and he fell off a cliff. And then you had Brock Sember, and then he kind of fell off a cliff. And maybe here we are in Brockuary. To start this off, going from a 44 up to a 50. The shot volume is nice, 91st percentile there, 86th percentile in goal coverage. Point per game is a little bit low, no hits or blocks to speak of, and not a lot of power play production for a guy who should be on that power play unit. But the one power play point he has did come in the last 6 games, 7 points, 3 goals, 4 assists, 19 shots in his last 6 games. So the shot volume has increased over that 2.55 average. He's red hot right now. The Islanders I guess, are scoring goals over the last week or so. So that is going to benefit you. Otherwise, I normally don't look at this team for any offensive metrics. But yeah, if he's going to start shooting the puck like that and the pucks are going in for him, he could be a decent option. And he also could be trade bait heading into the trade deadline. So maybe you get out in front of that and grab him while he's still on the island. And then he gets traded to maybe a Colorado, maybe somebody else looking for a center. Minnesota has expressed interest. So get out in front of that now and grab Brock Nelson if you want that exposure. His running mate, another player that's been there for years, Anders Lee, 55%, left wing single position, 6 points in his last 6 games. He's got 25 shots and 21 hits in that span. So this is what I like about Lee's production. 67 on the combined rating, and you're getting that because of almost 3 shots per game, shooting 96 percentile there, and then 1.6 hits per game. So you're getting a real nice peripheral floor and excellent goal scoring numbers, 0.43 goals per game. That's a mid 30 goal pace. For a guy who is, one of their better goal scorers. You're going to need players like Anders Lee, their captain, to try to make a playoff push. They're really far down in the division, so I don't know if that's possible. But as long as he's hot, you might as well grab him in fantasy. They do have this weekend 3-game in 4-night road trip that is going to be tough, especially for the offensive players, just because of the fact that they're playing so many games. It's hard to keep that offensive production, especially when you're playing the defending cup champions on the second night of a back-to-back. So a word of caution there with these two players. And then last but not least, for the offensive guys, we've got Kyle Palmieri, usually a goal scorer, but he's got 4 assists in his last 6 games, a power play point, and 6 hits. You can see his file. We've covered it in the past. Mainly a goal scorer with some decent shot volume. The shot volume has dried up, and therefore so have the goals. And he's pretty much prime and ready for a nice uptick here. You can see his ceiling at a 55. He's down at a 49, so I do see some improvement there in his file if they can get some chemistry going with those line assignments. The last guy we will talk about is a guy I mentioned in the open. Look at my beautiful rendering here. Tony DeAngelo, 7% owned already. 32 points in 34 KHL games, and this is what his hub looked the last season that he played in the NHL. Very power play heavy, 85th percentile. Shot volume was very low, no hits to speak of at all, no blocks, pretty much a defensive liability. If you're in a league with penalty minutes, he's probably going to rack those up, but you're definitely looking at him as a potential power play 1 replacement for Noah Dobson, who is out for a couple of weeks here. I don't know how long that is, but if they need a power play quarterback, which it looks like they do, that would be the reason to go out and sign Tony DeAngelo, which they did. So I would expect him to go out and get that power play 1 assignment. And he has been productive in that role pretty much everywhere he's been. He played a really good power play quarterback role in New York for the Rangers. He played pretty well for Carolina on the power play, but just very, a defensive liability. So maybe not reliable enough for Rod Brindamore. But coming over to the Islanders, they need goals. They need power play production. Their power play and penalty kill are historically bad. I think combined, they're under 70% between the two of them. I think they're 10% on the power play. So they definitely need a guy like this to come in and help them with their power play. So you could throw a streamer, try to go out and grab Tony DeAngelo if you need a power play quarterback defenseman. 7% ownership. He should be there for you in pretty much every league size. That's going to do it for the weekly ads. Up next, we'll take a look at the goalies. We'll start it off with a couple of starters, and you can see here Jacob Markstrom, one of the best goaltenders in all of fantasy. If I scroll to the top, you can see he was number 2 at the time of his injury, but he is down for 4 to 6 weeks. So what that means for you in terms of fantasy is that Jake Allen is the Devils starter now. He's been hit or miss. Every time I've picked him up, he's been terrible, but he's got 1 win in his last 2 starts, 127 goals against, 939 save percentage. He's starting tonight, and he should be the starter for the next 4 to 6 weeks. So a little bit of an up and down season for him. Up in the beginning, down for a little stretch here up until the new year, back up, and then he's climbed back up to a 59, 901 save percentage on the year, 2.7 goals against. He is above expected at 6.33, and the team defense is really nice there as well, but only 6 wins in 15 games on the season. If you're looking for another starter, you can look at a guy I got to scroll a little bit for. Can't find him right off the bat here, but we've got Elvis Merzlikins at 39 on the goalie hub. He is putting up a ton of saves. He's got relatively low numbers in terms of the season-long numbers, but lately he's been red hot. 2 wins in his last 3, 1.7 goals against, 932 save percentage. only 3 losses in his last 11 starts, and that dates back all the way back to December. So he has been playing really well for a while now. And you can see him kind of staying in this range, but just not a lot of support in terms of team defense. He is a little bit below expected, but he's been getting the goal support, which is nice. Obviously, Columbus has a number of players that have been productive. Voronkov, you've got Marchenko, you've got Fantilli, you've got Kent Johnson. All these guys have been playing really well, and that's going to help your goaltending, at least in terms of wins. So in a points league where you're looking for those wins, Merzlikins could be a really nice option. He's 33% owned. So he might be there for you in a 12-team league. Now, right below him, you've got Sam Ersson. He's a starter. They've got a 4-game week next week, so he's going to get at least 3 games. So if he's available on your wire, he's 24% owned. You definitely need to go and grab him. He might be your best add this week. 24%, 5 wins in his last 6 starts, 2.15 goals against, 914 save percentage. You can see here the team defense is pretty good. They like to block a lot of shots and take away those high danger chances. He's got 14 wins on the year in 26, which is a little bit weird just because he's just barely over 500, which is kind of, I guess, appropriate for the Philadelphia Flyers not playing all that well earlier in the season, but they've been red hot lately with the 5 wins in his last 6 starts. So this could be a nice option to grab 3 starts for next week. With that said, there is a couple of other options that we can go with some back-to-backs. So that's what we're going to look at next. A lot of these back-to-backs are, some are better than others. We've got Marcus Högberg here. He has been incredible for the New York Islanders. Varlamov is usually really good for them. Sorokin has kind of picked it up as well. But Högberg, whenever he's in, he's winning games and playing really well. He's starting tonight, 5% owned, 2 wins in his last 3 starts, 1 goal against average, a 947 game, a 962 game, and a 955 game in his last 3. So he has been really, really good. You can see over the last 2 weeks, a 955 save percentage combined. So whenever he's in, he seems to play really well. They're above 50th percentile in terms of team defense. He's 78th percentile in terms of goals saved above expected. His save percentage and goals against are elite level, but it is a small sample size. And obviously, the one thing to note with the Islanders back-to-back on the weekend, it's a Saturday-Sunday back-to-back, but it's Tampa Bay and it's Florida. I wouldn't want to start him in either of those situations. So you can go and try to find some other guys with this back-to-back setup. We've got to scroll quite a ways to find Jonathan Quick. He has tumbled from his initial really good start. He was relatively hot up until mid-November, started to trend downward, came back up in December, and has fallen off a cliff basically since the Rangers started to improve their play. When the Rangers were playing terrible, Quick was holding them in it. Now they're playing a lot better, and he's been horrible. 8.65 save percentage over the last couple of weeks. And it's further than that. So no wins in his last 3 starts. If you look at those 3 starts, an 8.68 save percentage, 8.72, and then a 7.78 save percentage. So he has not been getting it done lately. But they do have a back-to-back Saturday against Boston, who doesn't score all that much, although they have been a little bit more so lately. And then they've got Sunday against Vegas, who I would not want to start him against Vegas. Even though he did play there for a little bit and won a Stanley Cup there, they might give him that game. I wouldn't want any exposure to that. So with that said, there are a couple of other options for you. Justus Annunen has been really good for Nashville. He came over in that trade that brought Wedgwood over to Colorado. 4 wins in his last 4 starts, 2.5 goals against, 907 save percentage. But with him, it's kind of hit or miss. 8.57 game, 9.38 game, 8.64 game, 9.69 game. So at 6% ownership, you could do a lot worse. He has won all 4 of those games despite the save percentage discrepancies there. So he seems to win pretty much every time he's in the net. He's not going to get a ton of volume because of Saros, but they do have a back-to-back Friday against Buffalo and Saturday against Pittsburgh. Those are decent opponents to look for in terms of starting your goalie against somebody. They can be offensive teams. They have guys that can score for sure. But with that said, neither of those teams are towards the top of the standings. Now, another back-to-back, we talked about him last week as probably your best ad, and he was that for sure. 2 wins last week, 2 wins in his last 4, 3 goals against. He has stopped 90 of 93 shots in those 4 games and a 9.68 save percentage over that span. So he has been really good. He didn't get the win the last game that he played, but he played really well. And you can see here going from a 37 up to a 62, and that's mainly because of the quality of the starts, but also getting those 2 starts last week. He'll get another one this week. They have a back-to-back Saturday against Chicago, Sunday against the Islanders. It's the perfect setup for a backup goaltender to come in. Neither of those teams are great offensively, so this is probably your best spot start. Again, it's a Saturday, Sunday. Maybe you get out in front of it. He's 22% owned right now. That could drop because of he had those 2-game week last week, so maybe people start dropping him at the end of this week, and you can scoop him up on a Thursday or Friday or something, and just try to pencil him in for one of those 2 starts. There's 2 other options I wanted to touch on with the back-to-backs. We've got Alex Lyon here. Detroit has a back-to-back on Saturday versus Calgary, Sunday versus Vancouver. So he'll get one of those starts. That is Detroit. So Alex Lyon, no wins in his last 3 appearances, 923 save percentage, 840 save percentage, and then a 100 save percentage, but that was a relief effort with only 6 shots. So he has been playing okay, except for that 840 game, but just not getting any wins whatsoever. He's hot and cold. He does this quite a bit. You can see him hot at the beginning of the year, dropped off a cliff, improved, had a 3 or 4 game stretch here where he was red hot, took the net back, and then he fell off again. Then he started to improve, fell off again. He's kind of hot and cold. That's what you're going to get out of Alex Lyon. 8 wins on the year in 19 games is not the best. 2.7 goals against is not bad considering the team defense. He is above expected there. So he has taken the net for very brief periods so far. Talbot seems to be their starter right now, but they're going to have to go to both of those guys over the weekend. And then last and probably least is Dan Vladar. Dustin Wolf has been playing really well. Vladar has been trending downward pretty much all season. 6 wins in 20 is not great. 889 save percentage on the year is not great. He's below expected. Team defense is below 50th percentile. However, last 2 weeks, 920 save percentage, 2.0 goals against. And in his last game, he had that 2 goal against, 23 saves on 25 shots with that 920 save percentage. So things are looking up for Dan Vladar, and they do have the back-to-back Saturday against Detroit and Sunday versus Seattle, so not the best opponents in terms of team offense. So you could potentially see a decent performance from him, especially if they give him that Seattle game, although they have been scoring a little bit better with their improved play. Kakko, that top line we discussed earlier. But that's going to do it for this video. Let me know who you've got your eye on in the comments section below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.